Where's Lord Goldsmith?
Sorry?
Lord. Not on yet. Hello, hello.
They'll turn the microphone on
But
in a
we'll,
moment.
we'll wait for Lord Goldsmith.
Yeah. When,
You have become such a great speaker, really. You know, I know how you felt in the very beginning when you started, but you're really.
Hello. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Nature Day here at the UK Pavilion event entitled Forest Community Land Rights for Nature, Climate, and People. As stewards of world's forests, indigenous peoples and local communities are critical to protecting nature and scaling up nature-based solutions. But this is only accessible and possible if and when they have secure land rights. Greater recognition and increased resources are needed to support indigenous peoples and local communities to protect forests and nature for people and planet. This event will bring together indigenous leaders, government ministers, and a panel of global experts on the importance of putting indigenous peoples and local communities at the center of nature-based solutions. This event is complementary to the November 2nd COP26 World Leaders Summit Action on Forests and Land Use session on indigenous peoples and local communities' forest land rights. And it will provide opportunity to discuss the importance of the $1.7 billion of indigenous peoples and local community forest tenure support and next steps. A donor-led initiative has been established to take forward ongoing donor, indigenous and forest community, and broader stakeholder coordination post-COP. And it has also supported outreach and engagement of indigenous peoples and local community leadership groups, civil society organizations on the events and ambition. So here we go. We have 45 minutes and a panel of very, very diverse and very important people. How are we going to do this? We'll do this together. So I will first say that the flow. So we will have a welcome remarks from Lord Goldsmith, and then a video, or a video first and a welcome remarks, sorry. And then we will have two indigenous peoples and local community leaders talking to us about why this matters, and why this opportunity is important. And then we will have a panel, and in that panel, Lord Goldsmith will be listening. He's not participating, but he will share some reflections afterwards with us, including the indigenous speakers that's going to speak ahead. And with that, you can have questions and answers. That section will be at the end, and then we will hear the reflections. And it is really important that we stick to time. There are people here that will help us with a card to say 1 minute left, and I will be very, very direct. I apologize. And then now I will just introduce all the speakers so that we do not waste time. Because we want to really emphasize the importance of their participation. So first, I would introduce Regine Mboyo. She is from the Solidarity for the Advancement of Indigenous Women, SPFA, in the DRC. So she's not only committed to advancing indigenous women in the DRC, but also their role in community forestry. And what's been important over time is that with the support of UNDP and UN Red Plus, she was able to mobilize the indigenous peoples of Mboyo to more than 2,000 people to protect a huge area of forests and resources. And she advocates for the rights of women. She leads these dynamic for the groups, it's French, autonomous groups in the DRC. That is 43 member organization, 43 indigenous peoples organizations belong to this group. She won the Equator Prize in 2015, and she lobbied consistently for the legal frameworks for women's and indigenous people's rights. They've stopped 600,000 hectare concession that was poised to damage their forests over time, and that has successfully done that. So next is Samila Satere Mawe. Samila is a youth activist from Brazil. So she is a member of the youngest of the voices of the Satere Mawe people. She lives in Manaus at the West Zone. And aside from being a student, she also, a biology student, she also is an active member of the Indigenous Satere Mawe women and the communication team of APIP, the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil. And she also officially represents the Global Alliance for Territorial Communities here as in our panel. The next one is Vicky Corpus. She doesn't need any introduction, but I will introduce her here also. Until recently, she was appointed as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. She was key in the drafting and passing of the declaration, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2007. That is her greatest accomplishment and contribution to the Indigenous Peoples movement. She is a Kankanay lady from Igorot in the Northern Cordillera province in the Philippines. The last two of our members are Christian Samper. Apologies, my notes. Christian, he is a conservation and biodiversity expert. He still is the president and CEO of the Wildlife Conservation Society. It's one of the largest environmental nonprofits in the world, managing the largest network of urban wildlife parks and carries long-term field research in conservation programs in 60 different countries, 60 different countries. He is also the principal advisor for principal nature advisor to the Bezos Earth Fund. And last but not least, Lord Goldsmith. No need for introduction, but officially, Lord Goldsmith is the Minister for the Pacific and Environment at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office and the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, of the UK government. So we have them all named. Let's proceed. We will have the video. Thank you. I would like to call on Lord Goldsmith. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What an amazing film. I would encourage everyone to share, as I will after this, if it's on social media. I assume it is. Really powerful, and actually covers about a quarter of what I was going to say, so I can reduce what I was going to say and just say what they said. We decided very early on, when we got the presidency of COP, that we were going to put nature at the heart of our response, both domestically, in terms of what we do here in the UK, but in terms even more so of what we wanted to secure internationally, for all the reasons which I think are now very, very clear pretty much to everyone taking part in this huge jamboree. We know that there is no pathway to net zero. There is no realistic or credible, believable mechanism of staying within 1.5 degrees that does not involve massive increased efforts to protect and restore nature. And I think, it remains to be seen exactly what comes out of this COP. A lot of stuff is happening at the very last minute, but I think it is already safe to say that the debate has shifted heavily in favor of nature. It used to be in the margins of the margins of the margins, with the technical experts bickering among themselves, but nothing at the heart of the discussions. Now nature is at the heart of the global climate discussion. And some of the commitments, in fact all of the commitments that we secured and were announced on the second day, any one of them on their own is big news, whether it's the $20 billion of finance, whether it's the commitment from the 132 countries representing 90% plus of the world's forests that they're going to stop or halt and reverse deforestation by 2030, whether it's the multilateral development banks, including the World Bank, saying that they're going to, committing, in fact, to reconciling their portfolios not just with Paris goals, but also with nature. Or the financial institutions sitting on almost $9 trillion of assets, committing to reconciling their portfolios with nature. Or, I think almost most important of all, although it's probably not that sexy compared to all the other stuff, is the biggest buyers of commodities in the world, representing a huge chunk of that market, the majority of that market, saying they're going to align their buying practices with 1.5 degrees and with the overall goals we're all signing up to on deforestation. That sends a huge signal. All of those individually, I think, are important. Combined, each part reinforces the other. So I think we are at a turning point. Of course, we've got to make sure that everyone keeps to the promises that are made, and we need absolute accountability every step of the way. But it is really big stuff, and it feels like we are at that turning point. And at the heart of what was announced on that day was also a recognition beyond the usual box ticking, but proper recognition of the vital role of indigenous peoples and local communities. And the reality is that most of the world is made up of people living in economic systems that are devouring the planet. Almost all of us. It doesn't mean we're all individually terrible people, but we're part of a system which is devouring the planet. And yet that is the opposite of the truth when we talk about indigenous peoples and local communities. It is not a coincidence that indigenous lands controlled and lived in by indigenous people, hold around 80% of the... I read that and I wonder if it can really be true. 80, and it's just an extraordinary thing, and that is not a coincidence. It's because the land has been looked after. And there can be no more valuable service provided by people, for other people, for the globe, than the service provided to all of us by indigenous people. So when we talk about finance commitments, we made a commitment on the second day. It was nearly $2 billion that was going to be used to help secure, well, in part, in large part, I hope, be spent enabling indigenous people to secure the legal right to the land, which by rights is already theirs. I think that's a hugely, as the film we just watched makes clear. But when we talk about that finance, it is really important that we don't see this as a relationship between donors and aid beneficiaries. It really could not be further from the truth. This is the purchase at a pretty low price, if we're honest about it, of extraordinarily valued services, in fact, that are probably more important than any other service. Are more important than any other service that can be provided. And that has got to be the nature of the relationship as we go forward. So I was thrilled, of course, by the announcements that were made on the second day. We know they don't end there. We will continue as presidents of COP for the next year to build upon those announcements, build upon the financial commitments, build upon those corporate commitments to clean up their supply chains and stop investing in or being part of the problem. There's a lot of heavy lifting that remains to be done. But we have a good start. And for me, the value of this session and many more sessions to come is for us and our experts, and many of whom are in the room from the UK government, to ensure that as we start to decide how to invest that money, that we do it well. As you will know, you can invest government money very badly, you can invest it very well. And the way to be sure that we invest it well is by ensuring at the same time that those communities are in the driving seat. And so I'm absolutely committed to making sure that is the case. I'm being told I'm going over time. But I'm really grateful to be invited today. I'm grateful to everyone in the room who's been involved in helping with some of that huge heavy lifting that got us to where we are. But we've got a lot more to do, and we've got to get it right. And for that, I look to you. Thank you so much. Can I just add, I'm not participating in the but only because it's more important that we hear from the real experts. But if anyone wants to ask a question, I'm very happy to chip in, or try to.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lord Goldsmith. At this point, I would like to ask Regine and also Samila, to share your reflections on why this matters. Yes. I think it's which channel? Which channel? Oh, the volume. Two. Yeah. 2 is English? Yeah. Oh, 2 is French. Are you okay? Yes, Regine. I would like to ask for you to share with us why this matters, why this big investment for Indigenous peoples and local communities to protect their rights, to recognize their rights, to protect forest matters to you?
Chers dirigeants et décideurs mondiaux, bonjour. Je m'appelle Régine Mboyo, coordonnatrice de la solidarité pour la promotion des femmes autochtones et la présidente du conseil d'administration de la DGPA. Je suis autochtone et fille de la forêt. Nous saluons les engagements et promesses pris par les dirigeants et décideurs mondiaux en faveur des autochtones des 3 bassins forestiers au monde et attendons patiemment la concrétisation de ces derniers au niveau de nos villages et de nos campements. Aujourd'hui, je viens vous dire qu'il n'y a plus de temps à perdre. Il faut agir. Et agir ici et maintenant. Nous sommes dans une crise climatique dont le contrôle est sur le point de nous échapper. Il y a certes des solutions nouvelles, des solutions innovantes. S'il te plaît. Oui, s'il te plaît. Des solutions innovantes à explorer. Il y a aussi des solutions évidentes qui sont en face de vous et à votre portée. Je vous parle aujourd'hui main dans la main, avec mes frères et sœurs autochtones à travers le monde. Nous sommes les peuples des forêts et ensemble, nous constituons cette solution évidente pour stopper la déforestation. Une solution pour le climat, une solution pour la protection de la forêt et de la biodiversité, mais aussi une solution pour le développement durable. Oui, nous le savons. Vous voulez tous la croissance économique. Vous voulez le développement. Nous aussi, nous le voulons. Mais nous voulons un modèle de développement qui respecte notre mère nourricière qui est la forêt, qui respecte nos modes de vie, qui respecte nos liens intrinsèques avec nos forêts, nos connaissances et cultures traditionnelles, des éléments qui ont toujours protégé et qui protègent encore cette forêt, qui constitue une solution évidente contre les changements climatiques, contre la perte de la biodiversité et contre les risques de pandémie. Nous ne voulons pas perdre notre mère nourricière qui est la forêt. Sans elle, nous ne sommes rien. Sans elle, nous ne pouvons pas grandir. Sans elle, nous mourrons. Et ceci n'est pas une métaphore, c'est la réalité. Nous la voyons agressée, violée de toutes parts par l'exploitation sauvage du bois, des mines, du pétrole, par l'agriculture et l'élevage industriel. Et cela nous préoccupe au plus haut point. Nous ne voulons pas. Protégez-nous. Et vous protégerez notre mère nourricière. Puisque sans nous et sans elle, vous mourrez vous aussi. Chers dirigeants et décideurs mondiaux, nous sommes prêts à vous aider, nous les peuples autochtones des forêts. Mais nous ne pouvons vous aider si vous ne nous aidez pas à sécuriser nos droits sur nos terres traditionnelles. Notre terre est la base de tous nos droits. En sécurisant nos terres, vous sécurisez la forêt qui est notre base vitale. Mon pays, la République démocratique du Congo, est sur cette voie. En effet, l'Assemblée nationale a adopté une loi spécifique sur les droits des peuples autochtones qui est en cours d'examen au Sénat avant sa promulgation par le chef de l'État. En plus, le président Félix Tshisekedi s'est engagé à sécuriser les terres traditionnelles des peuples autochtones. Nous sommes prêts à l'appuyer dans cette mission. Les peuples autochtones, avec l'appui de nos organisations et d'autres groupes de la société civile de nos pays respectifs et au-delà, nous avons des compétences pour cartographier nos droits et nos utilisations durables des forêts, pour assurer que nous puissions continuer à renforcer notre rôle de gardiens des forêts. Non seulement des droits fonciers solides sont pour nous une solution évidente pour maintenir les forêts debout, comme le démontre un nombre croissant de recherches, mais notre sagesse et nos conseils seront essentiels au succès de toute solution fondée sur la nature. En conclusion, sécuriser les droits des peuples autochtones à la terre et aux ressources, c'est protéger la forêt. Protéger la forêt, c'est lutter efficacement contre les changements climatiques. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Regine. I would like to call on Samila. Thank you.
Bom dia, líderes globais. Eu sou a Samila Sateré-Maué. Sou indígena do povo Sateré-Maué de Manaus, Amazonas, da Amazônia, no Brasil. Eu tenho 24 anos, mas eu já vi muita coisa. Eu nasci num lugar onde nós, as crianças, todos os dias tomamos banho de rio, pulando no rio, das árvores para o rio, bebemos as águas do rio e vivemos num lugar onde isso é liberdade para a gente. Isso para a gente é liberdade. Só que eu tenho pouca idade, mas recentemente a gente está vendo muita coisa acontecer dentro dos nossos territórios. Recentemente, 2 crianças do povo Yanomami foram tragadas por máquinas de garimpo e morreram afogadas no rio. Recentemente, o povo Munduruku está completamente contaminado por mercúrio por conta das grandes empresas de mineração que tem dentro do território. E não é só a mineração que vem afetar as terras indígenas. É o desmatamento, são as queimadas, são os grileiros, são os madeireiros, a caça, a pesca ilegal e o tráfico de animais. A gente vê muitas questões que estão nos afetando, que vêm afetar os povos indígenas. Então, enquanto jovem comunicador indígena, enquanto articulação dos povos indígenas do Brasil, nós viemos aqui na Escócia, em Glasgow, bem distante do nosso território, para falar o que está acontecendo dentro das nossas terras, para denunciar as ações do governo em relação aos nossos territórios, em relação à nossa cultura, à nossa diversidade e à nossa identidade. Nós viemos aqui para falar para as pessoas que nós estamos preocupados com o futuro do nosso planeta, porque nós, povos indígenas, somos os principais defensores do meio ambiente. Recentemente, uma pessoa falou para mim, vocês são ativistas? E eu falei, o que é ativista? Ela falou para mim, ativista são pessoa que luta por um objetivo, por um ideal, e que tem uma missão. Eu falei, então nós, povos indígenas, somos ativistas desde muito tempo. Desde a invasão, nós estamos aí na luta por território, por nossa cultura, por manter a nossa identidade. Desde sempre nós estamos em luta. Então, nós, povos indígenas, sempre fomos essa palavra que as pessoas falam, ativistas. E agora nós estamos aqui. Ouvi aqui nessa COP pessoas falando sobre investimentos em relação à ajuda na demarcação dos nossos territórios. Mas de que vale esses investimentos se eles não estão sendo construídos diretamente com as comunidades indígenas, ribeirinhas e quilombolas? De que vale esses investimentos se eles, de novo, podem entrar na mão de pessoas que vão ser intermediárias, que falam, que trabalham em prol dos povos indígenas, mas que nada fazem e só estão nos usando como moeda, como troca, como captação de recursos? De que vale esses investimentos se não for construído juntamente com nós? Nós temos a plena capacidade de organização, de gerir os nossos recursos, de gerir e organizar as nossas terras. Nós temos a plena capacidade de estar na defesa dos nossos territórios, porque é isso que nós estamos fazendo. Em um país em que 100% era território indígena antes da invasão, ter somente 13% do território terras indígenas demarcadas, e esses 13%, em sua maioria, estar na Amazônia, ser os 13% de terra que mais preserva a biodiversidade, a fauna, a flora e a diversidade incrível de mais de 305 povos indígenas que tem no Brasil, falando 274 línguas. Essa é uma gestão nossa, é uma gestão dos povos indígenas, é a nossa gestão. E a gente vê o protagonismo feminino, da juventude, dentro desses espaços. Não é à toa que eu estou aqui, não é à toa que a voz da juventude está presente na COP. Vocês precisam nos ouvir enquanto povos originários. Vocês precisam nos ouvir enquanto preservação, enquanto donos da floresta, porque nós sabemos o que estamos fazendo. Nós estamos há muito tempo avisando vocês que nós estamos segurando o céu para que ele não caia nas nossas cabeças. Mas nossa luta é coletiva, ela não é individual, não é só por nós, é por vocês também. Então, todas essas questões têm que passar por nós. Precisamos de consulta prévia em todas as ações que acontecem no nosso território. E nós, da Articulação dos Povos Indígenas do Brasil, que também fazemos parte da Aliança Global de Comunidades, das Comunidades, nós estamos aqui para que vocês nos ouçam, enquanto povos originários, principais defensores do meio ambiente. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much, Samila. Thank you, Regina. Samila will be leaving us to join the march soon, so she will be able to interact a little bit when we're here with the panel, but we'll move on. But the message is why it matters right now for both Samila and Regina is because it's urgent, because destruction of forests is still happening, and their rights need to be recognized urgently, and this done with deep respect for their connection with nature and their relationship and interdependence with nature, things they do best. For this particular period, we will now have a panel, and we apologize we do not have our representative from the DRC government. She did not arrive, so we will have two panelists for the panel right now, and probably best for Christian to move here so that we will have a direct interaction. Vicky and Christian, I will first start with a question to Christian. In your experience over the years, being in 60 countries, working actively to protect nature, how important are the indigenous peoples and local communities to conservation globally?
Thanks, Nanette, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you here today. The short answer is it's absolutely critical. We as the Wildlife Conservation Society are interested in saving the most important places for wildlife and for people. And as was mentioned before, these are the places where Native communities have lived for thousands of years. They have deep, profound knowledge around this, and we need to absolutely recognize this, to respect it, and to work with them. So in our case, across the 60 countries we work with more than 205 different indigenous groups and more than 1,400 local communities who are our partners in this work in these areas. I think all too often we think about conservation as something that's not compatible with recognizing rights. Nothing could be further from the truth. And we see, as we are working with Vicky and others in this journey to what's being called the 30 by 30, protecting 30% of the planet, the only way we can do this is by working with indigenous peoples and local communities and recognizing not only the tenure, but also the management and building capacity so they can be effective stewards of the lands.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah, not only tenure, but also really management. And Vicky, let me pick this up. And anyone from the audience having questions, you can just raise your hand, including Lord Goldsmith. Vicky, the first question is really, why is tenure security for indigenous peoples over their forests crucial in enhancing further their contributions to climate change solutions?
Thank you, Nonette. Well, first of all, as was mentioned earlier, 80% of the world's forest biodiversity are found in indigenous territories. No? So it's really the forest biodiversity. We're not speaking here about marine, and all the biodiversity and other ecosystems. So that's first, that if we are able to save 80% of the world's biodiversity, even without our rights being respected, then what more if we're able to get the rights respected? More than around 25% of the world's territories are occupied by indigenous peoples, but only 10% of these are legally recognized as indigenous peoples territories. Around 3 million miles, like the size of the continental USA, are not yet recognized. So that's why the rights of indigenous peoples to their territories and lands are really very crucial in ensuring that we will continue doing that role of conserving the biodiversity, but also keeping the carbon in our forests. 25% of the world's carbon in tropical forests are in our forests. No, so that's the extent of the contributions we have, and we will even contribute more if the rights to our lands and territories are respected, and our right to have our free, prior, informed consent obtained whenever there are projects that are brought into our communities.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Yes, it is in that state of levels of conservation already being conducted, already being done now, even without tenure, that we can imagine how that can scale with tenure. Any questions from the audience? Yes, there's one. Please identify yourself. Yes.
My name is Jacob J. Flomo. I am from Liberia. My question to the panel is, particularly Vicky, given the huge percentage of forest land that is owned or occupied by indigenous people, and Christian, considering you're working in over 60 countries, what do you think are the key challenges? What do you think are the key challenges in working with indigenous people to be able to manage and maintain these forests? Thank you.
Should I respond?
Yes,
okay.
please.
Well, one of the key challenges really is that, of course, the fact that there is no legal recognition, and you have to fight for laws to be put in place. But the second challenge is also that the criminalization of indigenous peoples who are fighting to protect the forest. As you may know, there is this Global Witness report in 2020. They said there are 290 environmental defenders who are killed, and 30% of these are indigenous leaders. No, and the highest countries are Colombia, Brazil, and Mexico, and the Philippines, where I come from, which is that's the biggest challenge when you fight to keep your forest away, to be protected from mining, extraction, or expansion of soya plantations. Then you risk being killed or being filed false charges to and being detained. So that's their challenge. And finally, of course, the resources. There is a big announcement of resources now, which we are very happy about, but we want to ensure that we are part of the design in how these resources are going to be accessed more easily by indigenous peoples, and it just doesn't go again to big organizations and only crumbs will go to indigenous peoples, because 1% of the world's finance for forests is the one that goes to people, to indigenous peoples, and out of the whole climate finance, 3% goes to forest only. No, so you have to increase the finance for forests and also for indigenous peoples.
Thank you, Vicky. Christian?
So quick answer would be, it really depends. What we've learned in the 60 countries, it depends on the country dramatically. Whereas in Colombia, which is my home country, or others, the legislation is fairly advanced in this. In other countries, in Africa and others, it's very incipient. So you have to start with the right policy framework. You have to recognize the rights, build the capacity, and the point on resources is really important. Maybe here I'll mention, I actually also serve as an advisor to Bezos Earth Fund, but we've created a coalition of 9 different private funders. And about 6 weeks ago, we announced a commitment of investing $5 billion between now and 2030 in conservation. And this week, we just announced at least $1 billion of that will go to support indigenous peoples and local communities, which is getting, to Vicky's point, those funds to the ground, to the people who really need them and can use them the most. So we need new mechanisms to be able to make it efficient and lasting.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are not having a lot of time. One more question. Yes? Yes. Please identify yourself. Yes.
Thanks, Samila. Joe Erson from the Rainforest Foundation UK. Yeah, about the 30-30 agenda. I mean, obviously there is quite a lot of concern amongst indigenous groups and local communities around the world about a possible doubling of strict nature conservation, fortress conservation, which has been linked to human rights abuses around the world, and particularly in places like Africa and Asia. I mean, we did some analysis that the areas most likely to be identified as protected areas in the coming 10 years could put at risk 300 million local and indigenous communities. So if we're going to advance the rights-based agenda in 30-30, I mean, do we think that it's possible to have binding targets on recognition of local and indigenous tenure to make sure that we don't see a scaling up of coercive conservation? Thanks.
Thank you. Who would like to start first?
So very quickly, we support 30 by 30, but done in the right way. And I think it can actually be done where there's win-win, respecting rights, informed consent, and others. And for example, in Colombia, which is my home country, in the Amazon, what we see is there's legally, you can have protected areas overlapping with indigenous territories with full rights, and actually most indigenous peoples want these. And I think certainly in the way we're talking about it, it's not only protected areas like national parks, it is other kinds of conserved areas, what we call OECMs. I think that is the most effective way to really look at this. So it has to be done in the right way. And I think the good news is we've actually been talking to Global Alliance of Territorial Communities and others, and we're coming together. We can send a powerful signal that conservation groups, governments, indigenous communities can work together toward that outcome done in the right way.
Yes, I also support that. But just to say also that, you know, the rights-based approach really has to be defined very clearly. You know, what does that mean? And there should be indicators that will show exactly how these are, how the rights of indigenous peoples are being protected when they are expanding these protected areas and other territories. And I think that the other thing is, you know, if these are protected areas that have displaced indigenous peoples, then they should not be counted. You know, this should not be counted and included in the target because it's doing the, you know, it's approaching it in the wrong way. So I think those are the things that we need to think about as we push for the 30 by 30 target.
Thank you, Lord Goldsmith. It would be really important to share your reflections at this point.
Thank you
Yes.
so much. There's not a lot of time, so I'm going to be quick. I really loved so much of what we heard, particularly that 80% figure is pretty striking. And as you said, that's been achieved despite, in many parts of the world, persecution, certainly not the level of support that would be required in any country. So imagine the potential if that approach were to change. And that is what we've got to do. And actually, in answer to the question from the Rainforest Foundation, the idea of the old-fashioned fortress conservation, I think that's pretty much now an idea that has been consigned to history. I understand the concerns, and there's a lot of hysteria that's been sort of in response to 30 by 30. But anyone who understands anything about conservation today knows that you cannot have a sustainable approach that does not involve people. Those people who live in and have looked after forests and other intact ecosystems for centuries. The idea that you're going to improve things by moving them out, I think was not only unjust, it's pretty idiotic. So I think that in everything we've said, whether it's the money that's been raised for forests, the 20 billion, the 1.7 for indigenous people, the 30 by 30, in every communication that we've put out, in all the documents that we've produced, indigenous people have been there at the heart. And the same is true, incidentally, of the LEAF. There's been concerns about the LEAF criteria. But we are, as a UK, have pushed very hard and successfully to ensure that indigenous people are represented in the formal governance, that they're consulted every step of the way. If at any point any of these programs were to result in the kind of outcome that is feared by some people, the UK would come down on that very, very hard. And the final point I'd say is that look, we want to get this right. We want, there's not enough money out there. We want to spend it in a way that gives us the biggest possible solution. So we want to talk to those people who know much more about this stuff than we do. And I know that is the view of, look, Jenny here in the front row, who's going to be very much a key figure in designing our approach. You know, she would be saying the same thing were she up on the stage. We want to get it right, and that means working with the communities who are the experts, and we absolutely commit to doing that. But thank you all so much. I'm sorry we've run out of time. It's been a fascinating event. Thank you, Christian, as well.
Thank you so much, everyone. It has been a pleasure being with you. And yes, it's Indigenous peoples leading the way. There are models that are available, and there are ways to do this together with all of us here. Thank you very much.